After the Supreme Court gave the Biden administration the green light to prevent Border Patrol from enforcing our laws, 25 states have now signaled that they support Texas's right to defend their own borders. Now the internet is in flames as the phrase civil war is trending. On this episode of Forge and Anvil, we will ask the question: did Texas trigger a civil war? Can this toothpaste be put back in the tube, or is bloodshed inevitable? All this and more, so stick around. Welcome to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations about culture, theology, and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. My name is Connor. I'm host of this podcast. I am a husband, a father, and a follower of Christ Jesus, and I'm doing my best to represent him well each day. I'm joined by my regular co-host, Michael Aper.
Hello, friends. I'm joining you tonight with a rich baritone voice as I'm overcoming a slight cold, but I'm a follower of Jesus, a student of Scripture, and I'd like to see the righteousness of God restored to the people of God in every aspect of our lives.
Awesome. Welcome back, Michael. And your voice is going to make our viewership go up, no doubt. So thank you
Certainly.
for powering through it. And we are joined by first-time guest of the show, Joshua Abbotoy. So Joshua, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience and give us a little bit of information on who you are and what you do.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great to be here. I do a couple of things. I'm a lawyer by background, and so come from a background doing legal deals, especially corporate work. Nowadays, I'm up to doing venture capital and various types of investing with the group at New Founding here in Dallas, Texas. And when I'm not doing that, I'm helping to run American Reformer. American Reformer is a nonprofit that has a journal that we run articles in. And then we do a lot of institutional engagement with different Christian institutions to help strengthen them for challenging times. So that's a little bit of what I do, but really glad to be with you tonight. Immigration is an issue that I've studied carefully ever since I was in law school, commented on, and the last 3 or 4 weeks have been a very exciting time for those of us who follow this issue and care about it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And we're going to unpack a whole lot of that and really pick your brain on that matter. So, but before we get started, for those of you listening, first of all, if any of you were at our in-person event that we put on this last weekend, Forging Freedom, it was amazing. Thank you so much for coming out. We had a whole lot of fun with Gary Humble and Terry Lynn Weaver, and you guys were amazing. Your questions that you asked of us in the Q&A was wonderful. So we really appreciate your support, and we'll be sure to keep you up to date if we do any more of those in the future. Also, be sure to check out last week's episode that Michael and I did with Dr. Jared Moore, all about his book, Lust of the Flesh. It was definitely a worthy watch, so feel free to add that to your queue. Be sure to like and share this video to boost us in the algorithms. It definitely helps us out. We are at their mercy. Follow us on Twitter at ForgeNA for additional content and updates on the show. We are live on X as well, so feel free to share and repost the stream and help us to get the word out. So, and of course, we do have a chat function over on X, but it does not seem to work for us just yet. It's not in sync, but if you jump over to YouTube and Rumble, we should get your chats. And if you are listening to this on the playback, by popular demand, we have an email you can send questions to: questionforge@proton.me. questionforge@proton.me. So feel free to send us your feedback there. We'll go ahead and jump on into our conversation here. So, Joshua, obviously, I kind of talked a little bit about it in the cold open, but can you go ahead and give us sort of the lay of the land of where things are currently at with the border situation? Because even for those of us who are following it, it's rapidly changing, and it's easy to miss the latest news. So I'll go ahead and just have you share with the audience where we're at.
Yeah, so what's going on at the border right now is best described as a game of whack-a-mole. So, here's the thing. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, is not technically violating any Supreme Court order right now. But what he's doing is he's moving so quickly that he's doing things faster than the Biden administration is able to sue him and get a court order to stop him from what he's doing. So he's playing tricks. And and these are very small things that are happening. The Texas border with Mexico runs hundreds and hundreds of miles, and all of these flashpoints, we're talking about a couple miles here and there on the border. So I think everybody, stepping back, everybody knows how bad immigration has been under the Biden administration. Conservatively, there's been 6 million illegal crossings, although that's the government's own numbers. In reality, the number is likely very much higher than that. In Texas, it's a full-blown emergency. I mean, even up here in Dallas, Texas, on the north side of the state, you feel it. You feel it in the law enforcement, the drain on public resources. It's clear that there are large numbers of people entering this country every single day. So a couple flashpoints have developed down here in Texas over the last month. The first one is Texas passed some laws that will allow Texas law enforcement to detain illegal immigrants. So if somebody's arrested for another crime, and when they're run into the system and it's discovered that they're present in the state illegally in violation of federal law, they can be detained. This law will almost certainly get challenged. It's in the lower courts right now. But separate and apart from that, there's been another little debate brewing over a little section of the border called Eagle Pass, and this started back in the fall, but Abbott's doing these really modest little things. There's little stretches of the river where he's putting floating barriers, and then on some of the banks he's putting fencing up, and that has caused a big fight with the feds in those little areas. And so, I guess it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now, Abbott actually kicked federal border agents out of a little section of the border called Eagle Pass, a small area, but this is an area where a lot of the crossings happen. After he kicked the federal agents out, the Supreme Court reversed an injunction that a lower court had put in place. So now, technically, the feds are allowed to continue cutting wire. But crucially, nothing in that order said Abbott has to allow the feds into Eagle Pass, and he's not doing that. So they can't really cut the wire if they're not allowed into Eagle Pass. And then the other thing is the order didn't say that, Abbott couldn't put up more wire. And so he's continuing to do that. So I want to get that on the table very clearly. Abbott hasn't really technically violated any order from the Supreme Court yet. What he's doing is he's playing games and tricks. I would say it's political theater that he's engaged in that's making the Biden administration look really bad. On Friday, the Biden administration gave Abbott an ultimatum that that he needed to remove Texas personnel from Eagle Pass and let the feds back in. And Abbott did not comply with the Biden administration's deadline. So as of tonight, Texas agents are still operating Eagle Pass, and they're not letting feds in. And they're not in violation of the Supreme Court order. They're just disregarding the Biden administration's directive. Okay? So this is why I say it's a game of legal whack-a-mole. You run off to court and you get an order, and the order only says something very precise, very specific to the facts at hand. And what's going on is the Abbott administration, I think, in the last couple of months have gotten much more creative about challenging the feds and going to the border, trying to do little things here and there in a way that keeps the feds on their toes and really requires the feds to keep expending resources. But it's really good political theater, because what is the Biden administration going to do? They tell all of America that they cannot secure the border because they don't have enough resources. And then when Abbott lifts a finger, he puts a little fencing on a couple miles on the river, they're going to send the National Guard down? No way. He's got the Biden administration over a barrel. He's making them look foolish. And I think this is good. I think ultimately this issue does need to be resolved by the federal government, because even if Texas complies all as much as they want, people can still cross through Arizona or California. And ultimately what we need is a president in place who actually builds a border wall and gets serious about immigration reform. And the way the year is teeing up, it looks like immigration will be the issue this year. So I think this is all pretty good news so far, from my perspective.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, but immediately, in fact, I'll go ahead and I'll start by showing this video here because this is the type of stuff that we're becoming used to seeing all the time. Um, so for those of you who are just listening only, you can actually see someone has a front end loader basically, and they are lifting up uh, the barbed wire fencing and letting a whole line of probably a good 150 immigrants into the border. So we've seen many times removal of barriers all the time by the Biden administration to make sure that illegal immigrants can access. So this has been going on since Biden's been in office, and there's been a whole lot of litigation around this. So my question for you, Joshua, why do you think it took Abbott so long, and what's changed? Because he's had the opportunity to really step up and really become, we refer to him as the lesser magistrate a lot. He's actually the greater magistrate constitutionally. But even so, if you want to use that argument, the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, he's had the opportunity to utilize that for a long time. So what do you think has changed in the last little while that's made him decide to do it? Is it just, like you said, political theater? It's just convenient timing, or what?
Yeah, it's convenient timing. I know people's eyes glaze over when they hear these numbers, but last year we had over 3 million people, according to the government's own numbers, cross the border. It was actually probably much higher than that.
Right.
So it's just reached a crisis level. And, people living in, the Northeast may not realize it, but when you're down here in Texas, you see it. There's a neighborhood outside of Houston that's actually just being run by cartels. It was built by a big real estate developer in Houston. It's got 200,000 people living there, almost entirely illegal immigrants, and it's run by cartels. And this is just daily life down here. I mean, you see the effects everywhere that you go. You see the effects in the crime rates and, in homeless populations, in emergency room services all over the state. Public resources are getting drained by it. So it has been legitimately reaching a crisis level in Texas over the past year. And Abbott started doing stuff, back in the summer of 23 is when he really started to saber rattle. This is when you started to see him, ship immigrants up to blue cities. And there's different views on that. Some people don't like the fact that he's, transporting people who are here illegally further into our heartland. You should be detaining and removing, right? I mean, that's what the law says. But it is good political theater, and it's really waking up the rest of the country to the issue. And again, going back to what I said at the top, I think that's ultimately what we need to do, because even if Texas took over the whole Texas border, we still don't have a federal immigration solution. And frankly, as long as California's border is open for business, then it affects all of us. So, yeah, I think he's played it well. I wish he had gotten serious about it earlier, but better late than never. And I do subscribe to the view that you should praise what you want to see more of.
Yep.
I don't think Abbott's perfect, and frankly, I think the people in this state have forced Abbott to take action. I'm not sure he would have done as much on his own, but he's under significant pressure from his voters here in Texas.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think the pressure is working, which is great. And to be fair, something that may have even changed too, that I think has been changing the political landscape in general, is Elon Musk liberating Twitter, now X.
Mm-hmm.
I really think in the last couple of years we have seen the Overton window shift significantly, and I think a lot of that's because these dissident voices on the right are finally allowed to actually break through and gain some traction on on a social media site that's not just an echo chamber. And I really think that we're seeing that bubble up in some of the larger conservative institutions and offices. They're starting to actually respond to the base much more than they have previously, and I think that's a real positive sign. And maybe that may have something to do with it as well. So, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with Abbott. I mean, what's your prediction for how you think this is going to end up playing out?
Yeah, I think that so Texas has been setting up another challenge in the courts. There's a case that came up in the Obama administration called Arizona v. U.S. And in that case, this was during, Obama had a lot of border crises too, people forget. But in that case, Arizona, it was in 2011, they passed laws that basically allowed state police officers to detain people who are in the country illegally. That went up to the Supreme Court, and Anthony Kennedy and the liberals struck down the Arizona law. And Scalia wrote one of his best dissents, one of my favorite things he ever wrote in that case, and laid out the roadmap for how to challenge that thing in the future. And I've been pounding this drum for a long time, but we got to reverse Arizona v. U.S. and allow states to help with enforcement. They can't do all of it, but they can help. And the Texas laws were basically passed as a way to challenge Arizona v. U.S. So I think you're going to see that go up to the Supreme Court, and I think there's a decent chance that the Texas laws survive. I think the court might overturn that prior case, and so I'm excited about that. I mean, I think the best case scenario is that we continue to have a spotlight on this issue. Abbott keeps doing what he's doing, basically, which is making it really tricky on the feds, making them look bad, getting them to have to sue Texas to stop enforcing the border, because that makes our federal government look like it's committed to lawlessness, which it is.
Right.
I mean, it helps everybody in the country see the reality of what our federal government wants to do, which is ensure that the laws are not enforced. And so if we can do that over the course of the year, I think that's a good outcome, because it helps Trump win. And then I think he'll win in a way where he has a mandate to fix the border, not once and for all, but materially, by putting up a border wall, doing mass deportations. I mean, the polling on this stuff is crazy. Like 66% of Americans support mass deportation. There are very few issues today in our political life where the population has that much of a consensus. It's not reflected in our elite politicians by any means, but normal voters on the street, including people on the left, are fed up with the repeated failure to secure our nation.
Yeah, I agree. We've had quite a few chats coming in. We appreciate all of you joining in here. Shara Joel said, "I dislike Colorado's governor immensely, but I appreciate that he was shipping illegal immigrants to Chicago and New York. It's amazing how these cities are so pro illegal immigration until their cities get invaded." Bingo. Brenna Men says he's checking in, listening. Michaela's listening. She said the wall is going to be a strong card for Trump to play on. I completely agree. I think that it's something that I was telling this to my wife the other day. I was saying, a lot of people in these blue cities and states, they know that Trump is known for build the wall. Whether you like Trump or you hate Trump, that is why so many people did dislike Trump. And so now that so many of these people are getting, I guess we'll say red pilled, even though that term has been pretty much co-opted at this point. But a lot of people have been awakened to the realities of illegal immigration in some of these blue cities and blue states, that ultimately at the end of the day, when they go to the ballot box, there's no way that anyone, whether you were for Trump or against him, you're not going to forget that Trump was for build the wall and build it from sea to shiny sea. So, I think that that's going to be a real strong case for him to make come election day. Yeah. Let's see here. Michael, you want to read out some of these chats?
Yeah, Shara just put one up that I thought is really a good point as far as how we interact in the social setting. She says, "What I find incredibly insulting and frankly borderline racist is when people assume that because I'm Hispanic, I must be supportive of illegal immigration."
Yep. That's been happening a lot. There's been a lot of, that's the whole DEI argument as well. The left is constantly brooding racism. They're creating more of it. It's just like if you see an African American pilot. Nowadays, you're going to wonder if he's qualified or if he was a diversity hire, which is horrible because then you're assuming the worst of someone based on their skin color. But it's not even because you had ill intentions. It's because you now know that these airlines are intentionally expanding their hiring processes to make sure that more Black people get priority over a white person. And it's the exact same with immigration. I mean, unfortunately, we have so many people crossing the border now that, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the actual percentages are as of right now, and we'll probably never know that because we don't have the real numbers. But that's just the reality that if you happen to be a non-Caucasian ethnicity, the likelihood that you're going to be suspected of potentially crossing the border is only going to go up as we see millions and millions of people. In fact, I wanted to read out this tweet from Michael Knowles. He said, if you took all the illegal aliens that Biden has let into the country and made a state out of them, that state would be more populous than Wyoming, Vermont, Alaska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Delaware, and Rhode Island combined.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely wild. Joshua, can you talk? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I have a tendency. I try to be as generous as possible, and I think we do in this podcast as well. I don't I don't always like subscribing to the line of thought that's like, oh, the Democrats are wrong because they're Democrats. So I try to think, okay, from a liberal perspective, from a democratic perspective, meaning politically democratic, what is the motivation? Like, what is the counter argument? What is the pro illegal immigration argument? And whenever I see resources or have conversations in the public forum, it comes down to, like a social issue where people say, okay, well, there are people in, we'll say, Central America, as well as many other countries that are coming over across the border, but Central and South Americans who are displaced and in need of resources. They are desperate. They're in horrible situations where they might die otherwise, whatever. But that doesn't deny the fact that what we are arguing is whether to allow people to cross our border illegally, thus breaking our laws. So how is it that our argument as a society is whether or not the laws that we have in place should in fact be abided by? And I know that it's just a revolving door. It comes back and back, and this conversation has been going on for a long, long time. And Renaissance of Men just commented, quote, borders aren't
Borders don't real.
Borders don't real is what he said, but borders aren't real, I think is what he means.
America bad, climate change, privilege.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that propaganda.
That there's this false understanding that the quote-unquote conservative perspective is that we just don't want any Mexicans in America. Well, no. Come on over through the port of entry legally. And most of the time, access to the nation is pretty generous. Now, getting documents and getting a green card, getting citizenship, that can be very challenging for a lot of people. And I do want to recognize that can be a very difficult process. And yet, some of the most patriotic people that I've ever met are Central American immigrants who have earned their citizenship in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think in the moment we probably need an immigration moratorium. I'm interested to hear if you agree with that, Joshua. But the main reason why is just because I'm fine with us maybe reconsidering, how many legal entries we want to allow one day, and of course I'm for fixing up the system and making it more streamlined and things like that. But I think that's a question for another day, just because of the way things that have changed so much with the influx of immigrants, both legal and illegal. I think that we just need time for assimilation to take place. And then, of course, I do think with the illegal immigrants, we do need a deportation program going on because there's just way too many. And there are many dangerous ones. And we can talk about that in a moment. But what's your thoughts on a moratorium, Joshua?
Yeah. I think I think it would be prudent. I mean, of course, let's talk first about just securing our borders. and then you can talk about how you should change the legal immigration structure. But frankly, at a time when we have over 3 million people enter our country illegally every single year, debating about legal immigration levels is kind of a waste of time and a distraction. So yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. And our founders worried about this. That anybody who cares about a republic worries about this. A republic, which is what we have, depends upon a high degree of social trust and cohesion. So, just think about the way lots of things in our government are set up. I mean, even the fact that we have a jury system, I mean, that's a lot of trust. You're putting your fate for a criminal trial in the hands of just 12 random people picked from the population around your area, and they're going to vote on whether you get to live or die. Our whole system was built on high degrees of trust. And I mean, we could talk about, secular sociologists who've made this point, like Robert Putnam in Bowling Alone. He talks about how, high immigration levels reduce social trust and they atomize people. But I mean, this isn't just a point that scary conservatives make. It's kind of a known dynamic. And so, yeah, we've got probably pushing 30 million people in this country illegally, and it's creating factions. It's tearing our country apart. Those 30 million people are here essentially at the grace of the Democratic administration, and so they tend to vote and act politically in reliable ways. It's poisonous for the politics in this country. And so, I think I would be supportive of some sort of moratorium, simply because, the assimilation process has failed. People don't even, the idea of American identity is just very watered down. A lot of Americans don't know who we are or what we stand for, what our political tradition and history is, and we've got to fix that, and that takes time.
Yeah. Do you want to address Shara Joel's chat here? She said, and we need to fix the anchor baby loophole. And of course, she's referring to the horrible reading of the Constitution. But I'll have you speak to that, Joshua.
Yeah, we're one of 2 developed countries in the world that allows this anchor baby citizenship. And Canada is the other first world country that allows what they call birthright citizenship. But I mean, that I think people understand. But if you are 8 months pregnant and happen to slip across the border and have your baby in Texas, that baby's now an American citizen.
Right.
And the state can't deport the mother of a citizen, so that's why they call the babies anchor babies. You happen to have the baby in this country, and then automatically a certain number of people resultingly get citizenship or some type of legal status as a result of the accident of where that birth occurred. It's absurd. It's kind of an old-fashioned concept that's a hangover from the days when it was a lot harder to travel. So, I think that the court case that said the Constitution gives birthright citizenship happened in the late 1800s, before the advent of the airplane. It happened at a time when we didn't have porous borders. And so, at a time like that, it maybe made a little bit more sense. But given where we are today, where anybody from across the world can enter the country and have a baby here, it creates a really weird, system where citizenship is given to whoever happens to be in the country when they're about to give birth. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it needs to be fixed. Fixing it would require some kind of a constitutional amendment or reversing the Supreme Court case that found that birthright citizenship was in the Constitution. So it's a little bit of an uphill climb, but agree it needs to be fixed.
Right. And it's a horrible reading of the 14th Amendment, I believe. And it's
Yeah.
They found the writing apparently in invisible ink that that apparently birthright citizenship includes walking over the border and delivering your child. Yeah, it's unfortunate. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about sort of the evangelical arguments that we hear, because we hear a lot of big Eva types talk about how we should be loving our neighbors and we should be letting people in, because because that's the way to love our neighbor, is to let as many people in as possible into the U.S. because we have apparently endless resources in their minds. So, um, what do you both of you guys think about some of those arguments as they're laid out?
Well, to use the loving your neighbor, I mean, we've heard that text be, I'll use a gentle word and say misappropriated by, Gavin Newsom's uh, use of it to try to get you to have an abortion. We now are we are comparing it to the whole immigration issue, and it is a multifaceted issue because from a biblical perspective, yeah, I think Christians have a responsibility to care for the sojourner, to look after people in need. However, we also have a responsibility to abide by the laws of the land. And that's, I think, to me, that's where it goes right back to what I was saying earlier, is the notion that we should allow illegal immigration is really just ludicrous. And I know the underlying conversation is about changing the legality and just not making it illegal for anyone to come over if you're really on that far side of the aisle. But we need to think about the law of our land as a state, as that pertains to drug abuse, as that pertains to sex trafficking, and how those horrible crimes and human atrocities are so intimately tied up into the illegal immigration issue. So to say that it's loving our neighbor to allow sin to run rampant, I mean, that just doesn't add up. It's not biblical. It's not kind. It's not loving. Yes, we need to be able to care for and love immigrants and sojourners within the bounds of righteousness. And I think within those bounds of righteousness, as much as possible, until the law of the land defies the law of God, then we need to honor the law of the land and submit to the governing authorities in the way that we handle immigration. And as it comes to our individual responsibility, absolutely, I think unfortunately we do a poor job as a church, even, and as a conservative church, of caring for those who are in need, who have come as immigrants lawfully. And because that, there's I think a disconnect in the public view of what the evangelical position is, where we're blocked into either you're a staunch conservative and you don't want anything to do with immigrants and you want them all just to be shipped back to where they came from, which I don't think is a healthy perspective. Or you're like Big Eva, like what you're talking about, and we're convincing people that it's loving to completely neglect the law, completely neglect the well-being of the individuals who are coming over here in favor of just shipping them here, when it's a more complex issue than just that. So neither of those perspectives do I think are biblically sound or admirable for a Christian to uphold.
Yeah, I think to build off of that, I think the other thing that we need to get on the table is that, God, I think sometimes the way that evangelicals talk about this issue, they're taking expectations for the church and putting it on the government in a way
Yeah.
that's misleading. The church should minister to everybody that comes within its doors, right? Like the church should be helping people. At the same time, the government has the responsibility to protect its citizens. And I would say it's kind of like when you're a father. I don't know if you guys are fathers. I am. God wants me to care about my own kids more than others, in the sense that, if I don't have, like, if I have extra food that I can feed other people, that's great. But the first and foremost thing that he's given me is a responsibility and a duty to provide for my family. And it's the same way with the government, just on a larger scale. Our rulers, like, God wants his rulers to, first and foremost, protect the citizens of their nations. If they can go above that, that's great. But when you look at the calculus, it's not, America can't save the entire world, right? we don't have infinite resources. Those resources have to be prioritized. And it's good and righteous for an American government to prioritize American citizens, their well-being above, a citizen of the globe.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the distinction between the responsibility of the state and the responsibility of the church. Because as a church, I mean, look at welfare as an example. The state does an abhorrent job with welfare and it's abused wildly, but I think it's due to a vacuum that is a result of the church not enacting the proper welfare that it's been called to do by Christ himself. So, in my opinion, if the church were doing better job with welfare, the state wouldn't need to. Now, clearly, when it comes to border laws and legislation surrounding the protection of the American populace, the state has an active role in the legal immigration process. But after that, it's the church's responsibility, I think, to minister to and care for people who are here, who are in need. But it's also the church's responsibility as citizens, if we are in fact citizens of the United States, to honor the governing authorities and to submit to those governing authorities out of good faith and trust God to put leadership in place who will either enact justice or bring about God's own justice in these situations.
Renaissance Man said, I agree with Joshua entirely. However, evangelicals call his position kinism, and we do have infinite money via the Federal Reserve. This word kinism seems to have an inexplicable hold on the evangelical mind. Care to respond, Joshua?
Yeah, I've heard this word a lot. I'm not sure I've ever met a kinist. So, if anybody's out there, I'd love to hear from somebody who actually believes this kinism. This is common sense that every country, in the world is held to. And by the way, it's in the Old Testament. While we're talking about Scripture, yes, the Old Testament says to treat the sojourner kindly and with respect. Now, there's a question underlying that, right? Like, how did the sojourner sort of come to be in the land? Are they a welcome guest? Or are they an invader? I don't know. You've got to, like that would presumably make a difference in how we should interpret that text.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other parts of the Old Testament that in Deuteronomy that make very clear that foreigners coming and ruling over the Israelites was a form of divine judgment. There's passages where the divine judgment is that foreigners will come and they will take your land and they will commit crimes against you and all of this. So if we're going to start going back to Deuteronomy for our immigration policy, we need to read all of it because it's not as simple as Big Eva tends to make it sound. But these arguments about kinism or something. I mean, it's kind of like it's just how anybody, people would say if you want secure borders, that you're racist or whatever else. These terms just get thrown around by the left a lot of times with no good faith attempt to prove them, and that just makes the terms kind of meaningless, and people laugh it off. I mean, I was, when I was in law school, I remember I was, I think I was like, I said something in class that was pro-life, and somebody called me a fascist for saying it. And ever since then, I've kind of, I think that kind of broke me a little bit of the fear of these labels. I mean, we certainly should be reasonable and test all of our beliefs against Scripture. But these sorts of words tend to get thrown at everything that's to the left of Bernie Sanders. So they often don't have much meaning.
Yeah, I agree.
And we tend to look at the sojourner, those passages that you're talking about from the Pentateuch of being generous, welcoming a sojourner, welcoming the person from outside of the nation, and yet they're still held to a standard, and the standard's rather rigid. I mean, we look at since Genesis chapter 17, God said to Abraham, if anyone comes into your home and into your tent and stays with you, they have to be circumcised. And we see that it come into play later on where people are being circumcised once they join into this nation, what ultimately becomes a nation and then a kingdom of Israel, if we want to use that as the example, because that's the biblical basis. Mm-hmm. They're not just coming and doing what they want. they're coming and conforming to the standard of living and the lifestyle and the customs
Mm-hmm.
of the people that they've elected to join.
Yeah.
So that undermines the entire premise of illegal immigration, because once again, if they're coming illegally, they're already nonconformist when it comes to American law and American culture. So if we want to apply that as a one-to-one comparison of a biblical standard, then they have not, an illegal immigrant has not met the standard by which they should be welcomed into the community. And there are certainly many times and many instances where the non-believer is cast out of the midst, or the individual who's not circumcised is not welcome within the nation. So,
Mm-hmm.
we like to make comparisons, but
Yeah.
America is not Israel, which is really
Mhm.
important to remember. I think even those who are not explicitly Zionists, like to fall into that way of thinking that America is some sort of Israel comparison, because Americans tend to think that we're really hot stuff, so then we read the Bible and read ourselves into it. But I think we have more in common with Rome than we do Israel. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly we see instances in the New Testament where Paul's flexing his Roman citizenship cards in order to use the local governance to his advantage, because there's a underlying justice that he can appeal to in order to further the kingdom. So I know this is getting off track a little bit, but I just want
No.
to say that to say that the argument to be made that because pardon me, because scripture compels us to accept a foreigner into our midst, that doesn't just mean anyone gets to come in and do whatever they want. I mean, if we want to take that
Mm-hmm.
comparison, there's a very high standard of conduct, of religious devotion, and even sacrifice that is required in the biblical model for that.
Yeah, just think
Yeah.
about the story of Ruth. When she talks to move to Israel, she says, your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. I mean, that's a demonstration of the assimilation that was expected for people who moved to Israel at that time. And just to buttress your point,
Mm-hmm.
we're not Israel, but if we're going to look at Israel as a model or learn from it, we need to take all of that into account.
Yep. I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking about Ruth and Naomi. I mean, she specifically said, "Your God will be my God." And the issue that we see right now is even with people who become citizens. Michaela a moment ago said, "What harm would be caused to become a citizen?" It's a net positive, and I agree with that if it's someone who wants to come and assimilate. But instead we get people like Ilhan Omar, who and wokeness posted this. I won't actually play the video because it's a good 3 minutes long. But she said, "The U.S. government will do what we want, nothing else. They must follow our orders. That is how we safeguard the interests of Somalia." So she's telling a crowd of Somalians in her district that her top priority is to put Somalia first and expand its territory. So, I mean, that's an elected member of Congress openly saying that, yeah, I'm in the U.S. Congress as a U.S. citizen in order to make sure that my country of Somalia is represented in the U.S. Congress, that U.S. laws directly benefit Somalia and expand the territory of Somalia. Yeah, I mean, it's 100% Ruth. Ruth and Naomi. Like that story is she's saying specifically that your God will be my God. Well, we have people that want to become citizens and say, okay, now that I'm here, I mean, it's like if someone came to your house and asked if they could stay the night because they're homeless, they need to just stay out of the rain, and then once you let them in, they're like, all right, so this is what we're having for dinner. This is my house now. I need you to start vacuuming now. I mean, it's like it's 100% that same that analogy. I mean, we have people that want to come here and become citizens just so that they can make America essentially be subservient to their home country, and that's you're not a citizen in spirit, at least at that point.
I want to address Michaela's comment from another perspective as well, because yeah, that's very much a thing. There are plenty of citizens who have fallen far beneath the standard that we might hope for American citizens. But Michaela said, "What harm would be caused to become a citizen?" It's a net positive. I think most immigrants coming over the southern border agree entirely. The problem is they are overwhelmed by the requirements to become a citizen, so they feel compelled to break the law in order to expedite the end result, which is their prosperity. So their motivation, I think, 9 times out of 10, their motivation is perfectly sensible. But our motivation on the receiving end as American citizens should not be just to allow every single person to come in with their ideologies and their perspectives and their drugs and their human trafficking and pedophilia. It would be a lot better if the receiving end were able to vet some of that that is not in the American public's interest. But on the perspective of the individuals coming over, I'm sure a vast majority would certainly take citizenship as quickly as possible if that were more accessible to them. But because it's not accessible, they're not willing to do what it takes to get a green card and to enter legally. I mean, a lot of people try to seek asylum because they claim hardship or whatever sort of civil war issues, or that their life would be threatened in their home country. So there's a lot of individuals who have entered the country legally in asylee status, and that's also very different from illegal immigration. But go ahead. I want to hear responses to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately, if you choose to cross the border as the very first thing you do in America, you're proving what kind of citizen you're going to be, because you don't have respect for our laws. And obviously, to your point, Michael, you can say that the immigration system is convoluted and ridiculous, all those things. But either way, at the end of the day, you still thought the solution was to break the law of the land. So if you truly want to become a citizen and be an upright citizen, maybe start by not breaking the law as the very first thing you do when you get here. So that's that's
Well,
what
and
immediately comes to mind.
yeah, I want to say one more thing. I think a lot of people in modern America think of citizenship as like an entitlement. Like if anybody in the world wants it, it should be given to them. Like it's our moral duty to hand out citizenship as widely as possible. But it's a privilege. I mean, it's a high bar. And it should mean something, it should mean something that you've got to comply with the laws carefully. There should be rigorous tests about civics and knowledge of the Constitution and all of that sort of thing, because again, I mean, we have a representative government. Our founders thought that they thought that we were capable of self-governments, but not everybody in the world is. And I kind of agree with that, right? I mean, if you go to the Middle East, you look at the wars that we did where we toppled dictators and we tried to force them to have democracies. And generally speaking, that didn't really work out very well, because when the people were allowed to vote, oftentimes they voted somebody in who was worse than the dictator that we toppled. And we all know this intuitively. Having a virtuous citizenry is essential to our republican governance functioning, and so yeah, it's got to be a high bar. We've got to be vigilant about making sure that people who get citizenship are going to actually help our nation.
Well, like I said earlier, the immigrants who I know that have pursued citizenship and been awarded that are some of the most patriotic and beneficial members of society that I know of. And unfortunately, the individuals who were born in America and raised through the American education system are some of the least contributive American citizens who do not vote in accordance with sound reasoning. They don't vote at all sometimes. They don't participate in the civic opportunities that are afforded to them as a citizen. But for those who have had to seek out citizenship, it tends to be, in my viewing at least, they have a much greater appreciation for what citizenship means and that it is that high standard, like you're talking about.
Yep. Yep. Have you guys seen the Minnesota Somalia flag controversy?
No?
So basically, I'll go ahead and pull this up here. So there was a contest for changing the Minnesota state flag. So this is the old flag and then the new flag. Oh, it's not going to load up for me. Oh no, X is struggling. So old flag, new flag, and then next you have the Somalia flag. So that's actually exactly what Ilhan Omar is talking about. This person said that Congressman Ilhan Omar wants to Islamify Minnesota. The flag on the right is Somalia. So that's kind of just more proof to a lot of what we're saying. It's not that we hate Somalians or anything like that. Although I guess apparently Ilhan Omar corrected that it's not. They're not Somalians. They're Somalis or something like that. She's just having a hissy fit on Twitter all about this, but it's not that we have a hate in our heart for these people. It's that you're coming to our country and you're just trying to make your own country just within the borders of America. I mean, that's not how nations work. I mean, that's just it's ridiculous to think that again I can go into someone's house and start building my own house in the middle of their living room. Like that's not how things work. And so unfortunately, we just see these people that have a lack of desire to actually assimilate in any means whatsoever. And now we have actual multiple hundreds of reports of different terrorists being caught going over the border. I think it was just today that the Babylon Bee just talked about how there was a man caught in custody who was on the terrorist list, and he was specifically released by the Biden administration over a year ago. So a guy on a terrorist list has been in our country for over a year that the Biden administration knew about. They let him go. They processed him and just released him into the country. So, I mean, it's not like these are all just families that are just escaping political persecution. There are mostly fighting age men coming over, especially in the last few months, which just makes you think something's going to go down. And we saw the horrible things that happened in Israel. Obviously, there's a lot of propaganda around that. That's partially why I haven't touched that subject very much. But regardless of how you feel about who's 100% right in that whole situation, it has at least put on the American conscience the idea that you should police your borders because stuff can go down really quick. And the reality is we are not doing that. And so that's why when people are attracted to Trump building a wall and you get types like Beth Moore coming out and condemning those individuals who would dare to vote for Trump. I mean, it's because we actually don't live in gated neighborhoods, unlike Beth Moore. We don't have this upper class lifestyle that allows us to go untouched by this immigration. We have rising crime rates that we have to deal with, and we have unvetted people. Right now, they're giving flights across the country to illegal immigrants, and they're not checking their papers when they go on the flights. I mean, that's the whole point of the TSA after 9/11 is to make sure that a 9/11 doesn't happen. And they're setting themselves up for another 9/11. So we have to be really brutally honest sometimes about the reality of the immigration system, because there are many soft-hearted individuals who mean well, but they don't truly know what's going on right now. They don't know about the raping trees on the southern border. They don't know that little girls are being found with semen from 10 different men inside of them. I mean, it's horrendous. And I'm sorry for you viewers for me even saying it so bluntly, but we need to remember the horrors of this because, the left likes to say that Abbott and other individuals trying to actually enforce border laws are causing people to drown in the Rio Grande. Well, no, it's the incentives that are keeping them coming and traveling up through Mexico and through the Darien Gap and all these horrible places. It's the incentives that are bringing them there. If we stop the incentives and they know that they're going to reach America's borders and they're going to be told, go home, they're not going to come. That's what actually is going to stop the human trafficking that's going on and the people drowning in the rivers and people dying of thirst in the desert because they ran out of water on their 3-hour, 4-hour, however many multiple day long trek they may even find themselves walking through. So we have to be really, really brutal because unfortunately, if we're not facing the ugly realities, we're going to continue to have people who mean well but don't know the facts voting to allow more of this atrocity to take place. That's my rant for the evening. So,
Pretty good,
gentlemen, if you want, I want to go ahead and jump back to the main question of the night. And with everything going on in Texas, has Texas triggered civil war? We see all these states lining up. Tim Pool is having a heyday. He's cashing in on all the times he's predicted civil war. Joshua, what's your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think so. But I think that I actually think that Texas is showing the way that this nation can survive without a civil war, which is governors getting a lot more serious about the fact that under our constitutional system, they are the governors of sovereign states. They have a duty to protect their citizens. And the federal government, the path forward is for the federal government to get smaller and do less. Part of the reason that our politics is so divided and angry right now is because we've federalized every issue. So what does that do when you federalize every issue and you've got 49% of the country on one side and 49% on the other? You're fighting, you guarantee that half the country is going to be very angry with the outcome, no matter who wins. But when you have states with a little more flexibility to move in different directions, that can release some pressure from the system. Because, in Texas, if we have secure borders, people will be happy. There's a wide range of issues where the American people just have severe disagreements. And if they're just allowed to live in different states and have some of their own rules and their own ways of life, that would ease a lot of the pressure that's happening on our federal system right now.
Yeah. If we can really flex the state muscles that we're supposed to have, we could really see a big change in American politics as a whole. I really think, it's a shame how vicious the primary got, but really Ron DeSantis did highlight a lot of what governors can do. I think Ron DeSantis really pushing back during COVID really highlighted that there are a lot of governors that are sitting on their hands, not doing what they could do. And that's really made the base, I think, much more aware of their state government. And that's a wonderful thing. And Ron deserves credit for that. Now, that you might prefer Trump, whatever, I don't want to get into that. My point is just we need more states to exercise their right to sovereignty, because ultimately the federal government did not create the states. The states created the federal government. We should ultimately be operating like 50 little countries that have an alliance together to basically protect and defend one another. But when you change from state to state, you should see some variation in how government works, because that's the whole point of our federalized system.
When we see that, or when we do that, you bring up Ron DeSantis and his work in Florida, certainly, shook up the expectations quite a bit. Now, the more power that is given to the states as autonomous would allow other governors like Gavin Newsom to make California even worse, if possible, than it already is. So, does that promote disunity within the union? Does that diversify the states themselves? We already have red state, blue states. For those who are on the more extremes, does giving the individual state power, will that cause those states to become more separated from each other?
Yeah, I mean, it probably will, let's be real. But, the one crucial difference is individuals can continue to vote with their feet when the states give them an option. When we federalize the issues, there's not really an escape, So, I mean, I think that, look, I mean, like, I don't like Gavin Newsom. I don't like the way that he runs his state. But if it's staying in California, I'm a little bit less threatened by it than if he's threatening to take over the federal government and nationalize his California model.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, people speak with their feet as well, and they have been leaving California in hordes and occupying places like Boise, Idaho, Phoenix, Arizona, even Dallas. I mean, there's a lot of Californians moving away and voting just as dumb as they did in California.
There's polling on this. The Californians that are coming to Texas are more conservative than native Texans.
Really?
They are mostly conservative fleeing Texas. I mean, Trump got, I think, six or eight. I think it's 6 million votes from California in 2020. I mean, California is such a populous state that we forget that there are more conservatives in California than there are in most conservative states, but there's just so many more liberals there. But it's a lot of those individuals that are going to Idaho and to Texas and to Tennessee and to Florida and making the states more red. Like, I'm sure there are the individuals that come and still vote blue no matter who, but there is, to Joshua's point, there's been a lot of polling done that's showing that Texas is actually getting redder because of these immigrants. In fact, I think they expected that Texas was going to be a lot closer in 2020 during the presidential election, but just during the horrible show that was COVID, even in the year 2020, enough people moved to Texas to actually make a difference. In fact, Arizona, I think, was going to be much more blue than it is, and it stayed purple only because a lot of people, again, moved to Arizona from California, and they've kept the state competitive. And I pray that keeps happening. And honestly, if you're in California, this is, Joel Webbin's whole argument with his book, Fight by Flight. There's a lot of arguments to say that maybe you should move to a swing state where your vote can have a much greater impact, at least at the presidential level, because right now voting in California as a conservative, you're, aside from your absolute local county level, it's pretty much meaningless in California. And there's a debate on that, and I've been back and forth on it because there's a lot of political arguments with the Electoral College that you can make for like congressional seats and things like that. But either way, that there's real considerations to be put on moving to make a greater impact with your involvement in the civic sphere. We talked about federalism, and we've been talking about we don't want issues to be nationalized. And this is going to be a little bit off topic, but it ties in with the idea of federalism. But at the event that we put on this last weekend, Gary Humble on stage was talking about abortion and how we don't want the federal government involved in abortion after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I didn't mention anything on stage because it was towards the end of the evening, and I did not have time to get into it with Gary. And I completely agree with basically everything Gary said all night. But that one moment, I was immediately a little bit. I was definitely in some disagreement because the one argument that I would say with federalism and the federal government is that the federal government should have only a few small essential tasks, but one of those should be defending the sanctity of life, and that's where abortion comes into play. And it's not a popular opinion, but if there was an opportunity to federally ban abortion, should we take that? I'm inclined to say yes, simply because the argument, if we want to use the argument in the case of slavery, I mean, should we just allow California to have their own laws if that includes California is open to having slavery versus maybe Tennessee will outlaw slavery, and we just agree to disagree on that? Or do we say at the federal level, no, that's a horrible practice, and we should ban it at the federal level? So I know it's a bit off topic from what we were talking about, but with we started bringing up federalism, and I thought I'd just throw that out there for you guys, as well as to clarify my position on the matter.
I think it is on topic, and the reason is, like you're saying, it's a preservation of life situation, and that's where it gets convoluted with the immigration conversation. So when it comes to abortion, it's pretty clear cut. It seems like a pro-life position is going to protect life. Same with laws about euthanasia. You could say the same about capital punishment. And these are all nuanced conversations and arguments, of course. But it comes to a human life preservation laws. And a lot of people on the left will want to use that same argument to justify having open borders because they see the hardships that people endure to get into the United States. But that, I know that just relates back to what we've been saying this whole time, because the solution for those individuals is not to just let them in and continue enduring the hardship that they've been set up to endure. They're incentivized to come by the hardest means possible because, for one, the port of entries are either not allowing them to engage in the illegal activities that they are engaging in, or else they're challenging to accept because of whatever red tape that the immigration laws have. And sure, immigration laws are kind of a different conversation than specific border policies as far as illegal immigration. So, what is your take on that then for the individual that's going to say the illegal immigration conversation is also a human life issue?
Yeah, it is a human life issue. But again, that's why I would say at the federal level that we should absolutely close the border for that same reason. I think ultimately the federal government again should have very few tasks, but with the few tasks that it does have, defending life is one of the only few tasks that it should have. And I think it's pretty evident. The only people that are open borders are either people that benefit directly from it, whether that be large corporations or politicians who get more votes. Because, by the way, illegal immigrants, they contribute to the census, which contributes to how many electoral votes a state gets. So, California, even with illegal immigrants who don't vote, which, let's be honest, some of them do illegally anyways in some of these places, but the ones that don't vote still benefit California because they give them more electoral votes. In fact, I think that they would lose like 6 to 8 electoral votes, which drastically reduces the weight that California has on the national level. So, anyways, back to my point. Everyone who's pro open border has something to benefit. Either they are a politician getting votes, or they're a corporation getting cheap labor. Or on the other hand, if they don't get something from it, they're pro open border because they're completely ignorant to the issue. Anyone who is educated on the issue but doesn't directly benefit in some horrible way, they are all for building a wall and closing the border. It's actually a very popular issue. A lot of Democrats have issues with it. Renaissance of Men was talking about that earlier in one of his chats. Joshua, you brought that up as well. So to your point, Michael, I think if the federal government is truly going to look at the facts of what's going to defend life, they would end abortion on national level, and they would close the border at the national level and build
a clear what you're saying.
Big wall.
Yeah, you're saying absolutely close the border. You mean absolutely close illegal crossing of the border, but retaining port of entry opportunities.
Yeah, port of entry opportunities. Again, I think we should have an immigration moratorium, at least for a period, to have assimilation. But that's just because I think that we have such an incohesive culture right now that we need to honestly rebuild what American culture looks like. And then once that's rebuilt, can we then have the discussion of how many people we take and from what countries, from what backgrounds, from what merits do we require them to have? I mean, that's a conversation that we can definitely have. But yeah, ultimately, ideally, we would have some form of legal immigration in a very, very controlled setting once we have proper assimilation. So there we go. Joshua, what's your take on all this with the abortion federalization? I mean, do you see what we're getting at here? Do you agree with it? What's your take?
Yeah. So after the Civil War, we passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that states must provide equal protection of the laws to individuals within them. And the 14th Amendment, in the 150 years since then, 170, has it's really I think been misapplied in a lot of ways that have swallowed up federalism. But the case of abortion, I think, is actually right in the middle of what they were trying to get at with the 14th Amendment, which was you can't just pass a law in a state that says, hey, this category of people, they just get treated differently under the law, And that's what abortion is, right? Abortion is basically saying, like, preborn people don't count as people for purposes of state law. They can be killed, and that's not murder, right? So the to say that the 14th Amendment requires equal protection of the unborn, just like the born, is actually really close to what the people who wrote the 14th Amendment were trying to get at. And it is a limitation on federalism, to be clear, because it is saying to states there's a couple things, there's a couple options that are being taken off the table for you. But it's actually really close to what would have been, I think, intended at the time when that amendment was passed. And I think it is sort of an appropriate limitation on state power.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a wise reading of the situation. And for those of you listening, I also want to make sure I'm not trying to misrepresent Gary Humble's views on that. I don't know what he would say to this conversation. It was definitely a quick answer given in a Q&A session, so I don't want to misrepresent him. So I want to just throw that out for clarity. But with all the talk of civil war and everything like that, I'm kind of of the mindset of you, Joshua. I don't think civil war is going to break out. Not legitimately, but I do think that we are at a very fragile moment in our history. And I do think that a lot could happen. Do I think it's going to be the 25 states versus the other 25 states in this battle royale? Probably not. But I mean, we do have, to my point earlier, we have terrorists who have crossed the border. We have a lot of people that we don't know who they are in this country. We have crime rates that are skyrocketing in some of the inner cities and things like that. So I think it's really crucial that we start to build anti-fragile communities. So Joshua, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're trying to do with some of your ventures? Because you've got interesting venture called Highland Rim that you've been working on, and you've got people like James Lindsay big mad at you just the other day on Twitter. So maybe talk through some of that.
I love the fact that you raised the word anti-fragile. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Anti-fragile, so there's a word called resilient, and resilient means you can withstand an attack and it doesn't hurt you. Anti-fragile means that when you get attacked, you get stronger. And that's the optimal positioning to get yourself into as an individual or as a community. And I'd say, thankfully, we announced this new real estate project that we're doing out in Tennessee, and we got attacked, and it made us stronger. So at least so far, I'm feeling good about some of the anti-fragility that's been built into this thing. But my dad and I have done land deals out in that part of the world for quite some time, and we really started to see that, a lot of people on the coasts were looking for a way to get, they didn't really know exactly where to move. Like, they know they want to move to a red state, but they didn't really know where to go, and they don't necessarily have family or a community anywhere. And so really, a lot of people were just dropping a finger on a map and picking a spot at random, like, oh, why not? This looks as good as anywhere. And so we tried to, and what we've been doing was trying to get out in front of that and actually proactively tell people, like, hey, here's some really good spots to come to. We've gone out before you and found these spots. And so the Tennessee project that we're developing right now is sort of in line with that. I can't announce the location yet because we're still buying the properties and that sort of thing. But it's going to be a bigger community. It's really a region that we're investing in and inviting people to move to. And it's not I don't want people to think it's like a prepper compound or something cloistered. The hope is that this is something that's inspiring and is very open to the nation and to the world, and people see that when serious future-oriented Christians get together, they can build incredible things that are an inspiration to the country. That's the hope. So we've got a lot of stuff coming. It's in some ways the fact that we got attacked in the media over the last couple weeks was a little bit early. I want to tell this Guardian reporter, check back on us in about a year, and I think you'll have a lot more of a story than you got today. But I think I'm really excited about it, and all I can say is bigger announcements forthcoming. But we know that the demand is there. People are eager to move out to the country, to get away from crime. And they're really eager to try to explore communities where they share some basic values with their neighbors, because that takes a lot of the stress of social life off the table when you know that you share some basic values, and that frees you up to do much more ambitious things with your cultural and civic life. Build beautiful buildings together and build culture in a way that hopefully something that you can hand off as a legacy to your children and their children.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's a great vision to have. Can you tell us more about the James Lindsay situation? What went down with that? Because I jumped onto X in the middle of it, and uh, it was a whole circus.
Yeah, James Lindsay doesn't like balkanization of the country. We were talking about this earlier in the show, and I'm going to put it charitably. James Lindsay thinks that the fact that conservatives are moving to red states and such, he thinks that's very bad for the country. He thinks it's going to divide the country more, and it's going to make us less effective on the global stage. He thinks it's like this balkanization temptation, and he's really worried that when conservatives get together and try to do stuff together, that it's playing into leftist ops, that the left really wants us to do this. It's a trap that they've set for us, and maybe partly they want us to all get together and build culture, because then they can tell the world, see, look how crazy these people are. They're a serious threat and they need to be dealt with. So that's James Lindsay's position. I don't think he's just holding it for clicks. I think that's his good faith assessment of the situation. I think the thing that I would say that James doesn't appreciate is that as Christians, we're now increasingly like a minority, and to us, we've all got mission fields, but any of us who are parents, our primary mission field is our children.
Right.
And that requires putting our families in conditions that are going to be conducive to the habituation of virtue and a good life for our children. And for a lot of people in this country, that's going to mean you move, you make other sacrifices, you save money from eating out so much so you can send your kids to a Christian school. It's going to require real meaningful sacrifice to pass along that virtue, because let's face it, American Christians have been abysmal at passing the faith on to their primary mission field, their children.
Yep.
I mean, before we talk about we should do foreign missions, we should go do street evangelizing and all the rest. But if you're failing at scale to disciple your children, then you failed at the fundamental thing. So that for Christians, that's the thing that drives us. And so anyways, that's the nub of the debate. I know I tease James Lindsay a lot. He gets on my nerves a little bit, but he really does see these traps that are set for conservatives everywhere you turn. And I want to say to him, man, you got to get on and get about doing something. We can't sit around doing nothing.
Right.
I just don't fundamentally believe the left is that good at setting traps anyways. And, and aside from that, there's just basic Christian faithfulness. What are you supposed to be doing as a husband and a father? Like getting out and building. And James is not a Christian. He doesn't have a family either. And so I think that's a big reason why he doesn't appreciate the strategy that goes into these intentional communities.
Yeah. But at some point, it's like we're at the Black Gate, and all of Mordor's been emptied out, and we're the guys in the middle, completely surrounded on all sides. And it's like, oh, but don't attack them, because that's the trap. And it's like, at some point, like, we're just gonna have to trigger their trap and just like, try to take a hill, because all the other hills we've abandoned. And I feel like that's what you're ultimately getting at. I mean, if you were to steel man his argument, what do you think is the trap that he sees?
Yeah, I think he's worried. He's worried that when Christians get together and build culture together, like if we're going to get together and make a Christian university and try to have a Christian school and build Christian culture together, he's worried that it's going to be radical or weird, and it's going to be easy for the left to critique, right? Like right now, when the left says, oh, Christian nationalism is a big threat, it's kind of ridiculous, because you look around and you're like, I don't see, where are the Christian nationalists? Like, where's the town that they're running, or where's the,
Right.
So I think he's worried that if this kind of more aggressive Christianity that wants to build culture, if that actually takes root, then there's going to be a viable threat. And he thinks He thinks the FBI is going to come down on projects like that. He thinks the media is going to have a boogeyman that they can now trot out there, and he wants conservatives to keep their head down, keep their normal job, keep sending their kids to the public school. He wants us all to kind of continue operating within the general, sort of the same system as all of mainstream society. I think that's a recipe for disaster, because again, if we don't protect our children and disciple them, then what do we have? I mean, the most effective missionaries in the country are public schools, and all of the groomers who teach at public schools.
You said the word. Not allowed. No, I'm just teasing you.
Sorry, guys.
No, you're totally fine.
You're spot on. And
Absolutely.
We've got a good example of this, if we want to call it radical Christian influence. It wasn't too long ago that in the news Grand Canyon University was under heat because of allegations about their financial aid resources, or not the resources, but their information that's given to graduates and students, and such that they're being audited, and then I don't know to what degree it ended up being, but they're, I think, sued by the Internal Revenue System, the services. So the IRS was checking them out, trying to take money from them. So yeah, to an extent, when there's an institution that promotes morality and Christendom, it's going to be under attack. But I would much rather they be under attack by the IRS and have to pay fees than not provide their 100,000 students with an opportunity to have faculty members who may or may not believe in Christ and believe in conservative values, right, and implement those values in the classroom in a world where higher education systems are abysmal. They, by and large, are completely lacking thought because students are not being taught how to think. They're being taught what to think, and what they're being taught to think is a horrifying departure from reality and from sound-mindedness. And that's why we have so many teachers in the public schools who have been indoctrinated by the education system and are now cultivating that culture of depravity.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and I would just say there's too many of us to whack down, and that's why all of us need to be doing this. The government can make an example out of one or two people, but if we've got, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Christians with this vision in the country, and if all of us are doing this, there's just too many of us for them to stop.
Yeah, it's like that scene in Bug's Life when the grasshopper has the seed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about. Either you do, you don't. But
I know.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
We're the ants.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where your project goes within the next 5-10 years, Joshua, and we'll definitely be watching with anticipation to see what God does through you and through your organization. And we need more anti-fragile communities. We need to be building new institutions, and we need to build new hills, because eventually we're losing all the hills, like I mentioned earlier. And at some point there's there's no more hill to die on if we don't have any. So we kind of have to create a new opportunity where those who are fleeing persecution in states like California because they don't want the state to take their children from them for not affirming that their daughter is actually their son. These people have to have somewhere to go to. And that's ultimately what we need to be doing with these red states. And that's a lot of what we talked about over the weekend is we need to make sure that we are doing our part in red states, especially to make sure that we keep our red states red and make them redder, make them more conservative, make them more righteous in terms of their legislation, and make sure that there's actually something to pass on to our children. A wise man gives an inheritance to his children and his children's children. We've talked about that a lot on this show because unfortunately there's this American Christian mindset that Jesus is coming on Thursday, so let's all be apathetic and not do anything. And we've talked about how eschatology maybe affects that. We talked about just laziness, and But whatever the root cause is, that's just a horrible way of thinking that our generation of American Christians needs to weed out from the church. We need to be builders and doers. We need to have the sword and the trowel. And we need to take our place on the wall and make sure that we can actually have something somewhat resembling a country, and hopefully somewhat resembling a free country to pass along to our kids. So I did want to jump over to Rumble because it's a chat that I wanted to bring up a long time ago, but there's no good place to do it. So I'll go ahead and do it now. Pinecones and Rabbits said, not a question, but I always read Joshua's name as Joshua Attaboy, and I feel like he's a great person to bro out with because of it.
I've never heard that one before. Never heard it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Joshua, where can people go to follow you and keep up with everything that you're doing? And tell us, feel free to give us a little elevator pitch about American Reformer as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So you can follow me at Business. That's BYZNESS on Twitter. That's where I put out most of my stuff. American Reformer, we are a nonprofit. We have a journal where we try to run articles on pressing issues that matter for the church today, especially cultural and political issues, but we're all kind of grounded and rooted in, call it general Reformed Protestant thought. And then we've got a lot of impact arms of our organizations where we're trying to do engagement with different denominations and then Christian institutions like colleges and schools and things like that. So, we totally subsist off of our supporters' generosity. We've got some huge initiatives actually coming out in the next 10 days. There's going to be a big announcement for a new initiative that we're running. So, if folks want to follow our work, you can follow American Reformer at AmReformer on Twitter. That's AM Reformer on Twitter. But I appreciate that. We welcome any support and readership. And we're a crew of guys who are trying to fight again for our country and to help call the church to the leadership position that it really needs to be in culturally and politically if we want to have a good future in this country for ourselves and our children.
Amen. Well, we appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we'll definitely continue to keep watch of all your projects, and we'll see where God takes you. And I think you're doing incredible things. So we really appreciate you joining us. Michael, where can people go to find you?
Well, man, I'm just right here. I'm hanging out in central Kentucky, constantly studying, staying way too busy. Gonna slowly get my voice a little register higher, but I want to share. I like our little tradition. Occasionally, I'll get to share some scripture on here, and I want to read out of Romans 12. Romans 12 is just a good place to be. Romans 12, verse 9, and I'll see where it goes. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Yeah, I'll stop there. It's just a healthy reminder, I think, of looking at how we should conduct ourselves. And later on in that same context, it says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. And we touched on a whole lot of things tonight, but I think personally what resonates the most and is most important is the notion of micro-governance that we say on this podcast frequently, that what happens nationally is not as relevant to the influence that we can make than the local stuff. So be voting locally, be involved locally, but even that is a macro governmental entity. The micro government that we're talking about tonight, towards the end of our conversation at least, is how we conduct ourselves in our homes, how we conduct ourselves in our relationships, in our marriages, with our children. because the greatest influence we can have is on our children, and protecting them against the horrors of this world should be our greatest priority. So
Amen.
that's my little 2 cents. That's all I got.
Thanks for that, Michael. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Whether you caught us live or you're listening to the rerun, please like this video, share, repost on X, give us 5-star ratings on podcast platforms. We really appreciate all the support, and we will see you next time.